I believe that Ukraine is going to liberate Crimea by the end of August, so the end of this summer.
So this was said by Lieutenant General Ben Hodges about 7 months ago in an interview with Times Radio, which is a very pro-Ukrainian media outlet. And you'll notice in his answers, he doesn't give any conditions or qualifications to his prediction about Ukraine seizing Crimea by the end of August.
And I say that because we know that from history that war is a test of will and it's a test of logistics. Clearly, Ukrainian soldiers and the Ukrainian people have the superior will. The logistical situation for Ukraine gets a little bit better each week, whereas the Russian logistics system is frail and it was never designed to support sustained long-term land operations outside of Russia.
So if there's one thing I think the world has learned from this war, or at least those critical thinkers who are trying to get to the truth, is that Western intelligence and media predictions about this Ukraine war are appallingly inaccurate.
And you lie. And you cheat.
In this respect, I have to agree with Jake Sullivan's words here.
We'll say that over the course of the past 2 years, there have been a lot of analyses of how this war would unfold coming from a lot of quarters, and we've seen numerous changes in those analyses over time as dynamic.
Now, to list the number of false predictions and claims that we have seen emanating from Western media since Russia's invasion last February up until now is probably worthy of a TV series or documentary.
Don't take as read what you're being told.
So for instance, in the clip I just played, we just saw Ben Hodges, who by no means is a lightweight in the US military hierarchy. This man was the commander of the United States Army Europe in 2014 and probably has a cabinet full of distinctions and awards. Yet, as we see here, he has been so incredibly wrong, and I think it's fair to say delusional about Ukraine's prospects of victory in this war. I mean, Crimea by the end of August? Really? And I'll come back to more of his, let's call them less than credible statements about Russia and the international rules-based order and so on. I'll come back to that later. But let's not place the blame solely at his feet. So remember when Western media was flush with articles from anonymous US officials and intelligence reports predicting that Russia would run out of missiles? I mean, some went as far as to predict when the last missile would be fired. And then it wasn't until June of this year that a US think tank, CSIS, put the propaganda to rest and admitted that Russia, and get this, is never going to run out of missiles ever. And let's not even get into the US official estimates of Russian casualties and the corresponding absolute silence about Ukrainian casualties.
As compared to the Ukrainian
400,000 dead. Yeah.
So recently, in this month actually, Washington Post published an article relying once again on unnamed US officials who claim that both Russia and Ukraine have suffered 500,000 casualties since the start of the invasion some 18 months ago. And according to them, Russia is approaching 300,000 casualties, and therefore that Ukraine has suffered less, or only 200,000 casualties. Now, to me, this flies in the face of common sense for several reasons. First, since Russia has secured the land bridge since last summer, it's actually been Ukraine who has been the attacking force. And we all know about that ratio that says an attacker needs a 3-to-1 advantage because it is expected that the attacker will take more casualties as they are the ones who are engaging in riskier actions. But what most won't say is that this ratio is based on the premise that the firepower between the two sides is equal. But that's not the case with Ukraine. And even the West admits it. Russia outguns Ukraine as much as 10-to-1, overwhelming firepower. And yet still Ukraine has decided to go on the offensive, not once, but twice. But more than that, let's do a brief analysis of Western media reporting on Russian casualties in the Battle of Bakhmut, which I consider to be the biggest battle of this Ukraine war yet. And for those of you who disagree, please leave a comment saying what you think the biggest battle of the Ukraine war to date is. So the Battle of Bakhmut has been ongoing for some time, but started in earnest toward the end of last year. Let's say around end of November, early December, until it was captured by the Wagners on the 20th of May. So the first article was at the 7th of March this year, and BBC, relying on another one of those unnamed Western officials, said Russia had lost between 20,000 and 30,000 killed and wounded, and therefore casualties, in the Battle of Bakhmut since last summer. So from July 2022 to the 7th of March, the West estimated 20 to 30,000 casualties for Russia in the Battle of Bakhmut alone. And then we fast forward to the 1st of May this year, and John Kirby, US official, told Newsweek that Russia had lost 100,000 casualties in Bakhmut, and get this, in the past 4 months. So in 8 months, from July last year to March of this year, Western officials said Russia took 30,000 casualties max in Bakhmut alone. But then somehow, as of the beginning of May, some 2 months later, that number skyrocketed from 30,000 to 100,000. And mind you, this 100,000 is only in the previous 4 months, so from February to May, in Bakhmut alone. Now, if you find these numbers a bit sketchy, you're not the only one. This journalist from Washington Post remains skeptical since last August when he published this article right here. On July 20th, the CIA said Russia had suffered 60,000 casualties in Ukraine since widening its war there on the 24th of February. On the 27th of July, the Biden administration told lawmakers Moscow's losses ran to 75,000 killed and wounded, so casualties. On Monday, the Pentagon's number crept higher to up to 80,000. And here's what he says. Even 60,000 would be catastrophic. Over 2 decades of war in Afghanistan, the United States endured 2,448 dead and more than 20,000 wounded. At 80,000, it would be more than half of the 150,000 troops Russia was estimated to have massed on Ukraine's border by February 23rd. And they have a very nice quote here from CIA Director William Burns. It's always a range, and you know, there's no perfect number. So we have an admission here that US and Western officials of casualties are and will be biased in favor of Ukraine. Now let's return to the current estimate of 300,000 Russian casualties in this war. On its February invasion, the total Russian allied forces, which includes the Donbass militia and volunteers, amounted to about 190,000 in total. We all know that Russia has since done one partial mobilization of 300,000 troops late last year, and according to Defense Minister Shoigu, as of November, only 87,000 have joined the combat zone. So let's assume about 100,000 of that 300,000 mobilization is now fighting in Ukraine. That means there are no more than 300,000 troops in total fighting, and with another 100,000 to 200,000 Russian reserves yet to enter. So you tell me, how in the world could Russia have taken 300,000 casualties, yet still have troops to effectively stall Ukraine's all-out counteroffensive in Zaporizhia and around Bakhmut for the past 3 months? Gentlemen, this is the definition of propaganda. But let's return to Mr. Hodges. He was not only dead wrong about his Crimea by the end of August prediction, but he goes further and said this about 11 days ago.
So when I hear people say, the Ukrainians are not using the training they got, or it's going too slow, these are people that do not understand the complexity and the difficulty of what Ukrainian armed forces are trying to do. I think in another few weeks, we're going to see a completely different situation.
In your opinion, since he made this statement, has things gotten any better for Ukraine? You see, I place the blame on the journalists and the media. It is their job to question officials like Ben Hodges when they make these statements which seem to be in contradiction to reality. For instance, take a look at this clip where Mr. Ben Hodges makes the claim that America and the West are defending the international rules-based order in Ukraine, and the journalist questions him on the veracity of his statements.
Okay, just one final question. I should say the rules-based order in the global south, especially after the BRICS summit, doesn't really play very well, given Iran 53, Guatemala 54, Costa Rica in the 50s, Syria 56, 57, Egypt 57, Indonesia 58, British Guiana 53, North Vietnam 43, 73, Laos 59, Congo 1960, France 65, Brazil 62, Cuba 59, Bolivia 64. I've got a list. So the rules-based order, let alone that prison Guantanamo, is still there when President Obama wanted it closed down. Doesn't it show the president doesn't actually have the power? Who was controlling you as the commander of U.S. forces in Europe, really? We know now there are leading presidential candidates, RFK Jr. and Trump, of course, others, opponents who want the Ukraine war to wind down and have negotiations and stop the money. Do you think there's something in it that actually the U.S. military is good at assassinations and destabilizing countries, and RFK Jr. says, killed his father and his uncle, JFK. They're good at destabilizing U.S. society and international society. And I'm not a conspiracy theorist. Everything I'm asking is just factual.
Yeah. So you think that U.S. military has something to do with the death of John F. Kennedy and Robert
The
Kennedy?
military-industrial complex that Eisenhower referred to.
Look, I don't know where you get your questions from or how you do your research.
Well, you know what Eisenhower said.
RFK Jr. is not a leading candidate. Donald Trump has been indicted 4 times and about 71 or 91 different charges against him. I seriously doubt he's going to be president again. He certainly shouldn't be. But look, it was interesting, that long list you went through, most of those were 60 or 70 years ago. So do we have a perfect record? Of course not. But I would say this, I would put our soldiers up against Russian soldiers, Chinese soldiers, and you can count on American soldiers do everything they can to protect innocent people and protect what it is that we're supposed to be doing.